We're joined in the studio this morning by Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Lobes. He makes a monthly visit with us. Sometimes, if there's another big issue that comes up, we'll see him in between those monthly visits. And first of all, we'd like to say welcome back to the show.
How you doing? Good to be here.
We were just having a conversation off air. Um, Probably not necessarily. I don't know. Maybe some people would use the word alarming. That's somewhat of a subjective term. Big spike in rates, not necessarily in crime, but in what's coming through your office.
Yes, I mean, I can only count what I can count. I don't know for sure what the increase in crimes committed is, but I know that over the last 3 years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of felony cases that my office has filed in Twin Falls County, and misdemeanors are similar. But we've had about a 20% increase in filings this year over 2016, and that equals about a 30% rise over 2015 and about a 45% rise over 2014. So it's substantial, and as I mentioned on your show a little while ago, we've had in 2017 we've had four now of the largest months of criminal filings in the history of Twin Falls County in this year. So it just shows it's just it continues to increase. And um, if anybody believes that crime is down and that we're putting people in jail or prison who don't need to be there, they're greatly mistaken. Um, what we're doing, in fact, and this is part of the reason why I think crime is up, is we're not putting people in prison or jail who do deserve to be there, and they're coming right back out and they're committing more crimes because a significant percentage of the new filings that we're seeing are people who are either on probation or on parole or who have long criminal records.
Now, we were talking off air about this. These are the crimes that get reported. We have no idea how many are actually going unreported, but you can maybe extrapolate and come up with some sort of an indication that, if you get 80% of them of one number, you're getting 80% of another number.
Right. I mean, we're downstream a little bit. I mean, first, of course, you have the crime that's committed. That may not be reported. It may not be even discovered. The police may not solve it. Then you have the cases that the police work on and they're aware of, and that's a greater number than the cases that they solve, than the cases that are solved, and then they send the solved cases to us, and we file almost all of those, but some we don't file for lack of enough evidence. So my statistics are the statistics of cases that we have actually filed a charge against somebody in Twin Falls County.
And this is not necessarily just Twin Falls. This is Idaho wide.
Yeah, I can't speak for every part of Idaho, but I've been in communication with my colleagues in various parts of the state, from the far north panhandle to Idaho Falls to Ada County, Canyon County. And the numbers that I've given you are similar to those that are given by most of my colleagues. There are some that go against the trend in a strange and fortuitous way for them, but all of the big counties that I've talked to have about the same numbers that we do, and in the Magic Valley, or in the Magic Valley, several of the Magic Valley counties have similar numbers.
Now, we can always point to a number of factors. One, people will say population growth. I wrote you, though, this morning a note and mentioned fentanyl, for instance,
Hmm.
which I was reading a story about in New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago, is just devastating parts of wide swaths of New Hampshire. So you could have new drugs that are being introduced. You can
Hmm.
have population increase, and there could be several other factors. And it really, you can't pinpoint any particular one, I guess, as being responsible for this.
It's hard to do. I mean, different policies, either at the legislative level, at the parole level, at in probation departments, certainly I think contribute. Um, because obviously, if you're more tolerant either in the parole or probation decisions, then you're going to have more people on the streets who are prone to commit crimes. Population increase for sure. Anecdotally, you hear people talk about, people are just behaving differently these days. There's, and I've heard you say it on the show, everything from not praying as much in school or in church, or not church attendance down, or just lack of respect in general. I don't have any way of putting my finger on that, but that is certainly something that people are pointing to for, the breakdown in society kind of argument. I don't know about that. I don't have any way of tracking that statistically. I can tell you that crime is up, that jails are full, that in Twin Falls County our jail is over capacity. That's not a rare thing in Idaho these days. And for some, the solution to that is, well, let people out of jail then. Well, that is a solution, and that's like saying, well, Grant, why are you filing these charges against people? If you don't file them, then the rate won't go up, will it? And that's true. I could just say December is a free month. No matter what you do in December, I'm not filing it because our crime rate is too high, and I want to personally reduce the crime rate. And I could do that, I guess, by not filing anything. But that's not really the answer that anybody wants because this increase isn't just drug possession. It isn't just drug cases of any kind. We've seen an increase across the spectrum in every single type of crime you can think of. On a normal, run-of-the-mill year, 5, 6 years ago, drug crimes made up about half of the felonies that we file in Twin Falls County. Now, with the great increase since then, they still make up about half, which means everything else has risen as well. So it's not just, well, they're arresting more people, for marijuana. It isn't that at all. So, it's a challenge for local governments. It's a challenge for the state government. It's a challenge for our legislators to come up with something that doesn't just say, we're charging too many people with crimes. Let's legalize things and let's, reduce punishments and let's let people out of prison. That's not going to solve it because 50% of these crimes have nothing to do with drugs and are crimes against, you and me and shop owners and women and children and just regular citizens. And that's not going to go away by pretending that it's not happening.
Our guest is Grant Loebs. He's the Twin Falls County prosecutor. We're at 50 right now, and it's 9:14. Bill Cowley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Question or comment for the prosecutor while he's in the studio, 208-736-0300. There's a reference.
Let me get back to one other thing. You mentioned the fentanyl in the East. And of course, a lot of these things become real problems in the East and then they move this way. We are seeing some of that in Idaho. Not as much in Twin Falls County as in other parts. They've seen it more in the Treasure Valley and I think more in the Pocatello area. But we have seen some here too. In fact, we had a fentanyl arrest just this week. So and the reason that people should be worried about that is the extreme dangerousness of this drug.
Deadly stuff.
Yeah, tiny, tiny bits of it. And I'm talking, grains of salt size can be extremely harmful, possibly fatal. It is so bad that if you're a policeman or a healthcare worker and somebody has it in, on them in powder form or in liquid form or something, and you touch it, it absorbs through the skin. It can infect immediately the caregiver or the policeman. I mean, it can even be fatal. So it's an extremely powerful drug. It's developed for people on the most painful type of cancer in the last weeks and months of their lives to give them some kind of pain relief, as a precursor to their ultimate death. And so it is an extremely powerful drug. And to think of it as a recreational drug is just scary.
We have a caller with us. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on Top Story. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. I can't help but say that, just driving around and just living in Twin in the county here, that it's impossible to not see an increase. And it's interesting. It'd be interesting to find out how many of the crimes that are, say, non-drug related are as a result of drug use. When someone wants to get a fix and, and they have no money, what are they going to do? They're going to go out and rob. And you see that, because how many businesses are having a hard time finding employees that can even pass a drug test, a pre-employment drug test? It's pretty sad, but what are those people going to do? They're going to they're going to find some way to get money, and most of the time it's taking what someone else has worked hard to acquire, and it's sad. But I think the Twin Falls Police is doing a great job with the resources they have, and I think that we all should do our part to support them and kind of be their eyes and ears. We see something going on in the community that's strange. Let's let the authorities know and let them follow up and do what they do best. But
Well, I thank you for the input comment from the prosecutor.
Well, it's certainly true. A huge amount of drug crime, and we do have that statewide and nationwide, does drive crime in other areas. So, the next time somebody tells you that, drug crime is a victimless crime, just say, well, it wasn't victimless when the guy came into my house with a shotgun looking to steal either my drugs or my money so he could buy drugs. Or when, because he was on drugs, he beat up his wife or girlfriend or child, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a ripple effect thing. That being said, there are obviously also a lot of crimes where drugs aren't a factor. Drug and alcohol are a factor in a huge number of crimes, but there are a lot where they're not a factor, and those are up too. So it's just it's the wrong time to run around saying we've been too hard on crime. Let's ease up. This is going to be a problem probably for the rest of our lives. It's something you have to keep a lid on, because when it gets out of hand, it just gets worse and worse. And if you don't pay attention to it, it's just going to become a bigger problem.
We have another caller with us at 918. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, gentlemen. In my opinion, marijuana is a gateway drug. But the question I have for Mr. Lobes is, in the states around us that have decriminalized marijuana, how's that working out for them? Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with the caller, first of all, and you can get into trouble saying that those words about the gateway drug, depending upon what company you're in. And it depends on what your definition is, of course. I think it's not necessarily a gateway drug. I think I could just sit around in my basement smoking pot for the rest of my life and not graduate to anything else. And certainly it's not necessarily a gateway drug. But we often find that people who are on hard drugs, if they, at sentencing time, we get a history of them, and the history will often include started off drinking, started off smoking pot, a friend introduced me to meth, and et cetera, et cetera. So it is often, I think, a gateway drug. With regard to the states around us, there's varying levels of information available depending upon, in part, how long they've been in the legal marijuana business.
Can you hold that thought for a moment, because we're going to take a short break. We'll get back to that, what's going on in some of our neighboring states, an increasing number of those neighboring states where some of them have legalized it for recreational use. We're at 45. It's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Our guest in the studio, Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Lobes, and Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our studio guest, Grant Lobes, is the Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney. It's 9:21. We're at 50. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Questions or comment for the prosecutor, you can call us at 208-736-0300. And we left this off. A caller had asked about the experiences of, and I guess it hasn't really been very long, but we've got Oregon and Colorado and now Nevada. We might be able to start to glean a little bit of what's happening with the legalization of the recreational marijuana.
Right. And as I was saying, we have different amounts of data depending on how long they've been in the legal marijuana business. Colorado's been there the longest, Oregon, also Washington next, and then Nevada's just very recently. And I don't have any information about Nevada that I've read, although I'm sure the information will start to come in pretty soon. Both Washington and especially Oregon are having increased problems. They're having increased number of emergency room visits. They're having increased number of children who've ingested harmful and possibly even fatal amounts of marijuana, especially through eating these marijuana candies and cookies and things. The worst examples, of course, are coming from Colorado, where there is much more data coming in because they've been at it longer. And across the spectrum, it is what you'd expect. I mean, you have a large part of the community now smoking marijuana whenever they want to, for whatever the reason they want to, and so the emergency room visits are up, the overdoses are up, the um, you know number of sick days are up. Cost to the community for medical treatment is up. Crime is up. And in Colorado, they have a system based on the constitutional amendment they passed where every county doesn't need to have it. The counties can opt out. If you look at the proposal that's being made by the people circulating the petition in Idaho, it doesn't even allow counties to opt out. I mean, if that were to pass, Twin Falls County would have to allow marijuana sales in Twin Falls County. So Colorado's law, bad as it is, isn't even as bad as the one that Idaho is looking at if this petition gets on the ballot. So what we're seeing in every one of these states, we're not seeing anything good in any of them. It's varying degrees of bad. And then, as I've said on this show before, the kind of intangible, but nevertheless really obvious, is go to these places and look at what they look like. Walk down a street that you used to go to in Denver, to where there were little shops and where you could get a Starbucks coffee and sit out on the patio and watch, do some people watching. Go there now, and you'll see that the change has been dramatic in some of these neighborhoods. And if that's a change you like, if you like to see, the marijuana smoke billowing in your face, and the people that are frequenting these shops, both from Colorado and from other states, coming there because it's legal. If you like to see that sort of atmosphere that's been created, then by all means turn Idaho into that. But if you don't like what you see, um, take heed, because that's what will happen if we legalize it here.
We should point out too that we're going to start seeing. You can have somebody who may come to Jackpot to gamble, and they may have a bag of marijuana for recreational use. Buddy says, "Hey, let's drive up to Buster's and get something to eat." And you're going to start seeing, and then they drive at 85 miles per hour. They get pulled over. We're going to start seeing more and more of those where people forget. It's like carrying, a firearm across some state
Sure.
lines, or going on an airplane with it.
And of course, the number of people in all these states that are using it and driving under the influence of marijuana is increased significantly as well. So, it's just another problem that you have to deal with as a citizen that doesn't do that. It's just another thing that you have to be careful about and watch for when your neighbors are all doing it and when it's legal and you can't stop it.
But Route 93 is already a conduit for a lot of these drug dealers, and to suddenly have it just legalized over Route 93 a few
Right.
miles away, I would think is going to create a lot of problems in southern Twin Falls County.
Well, it has already in the counties that border states that have legalized. If you go up into the Panhandle, where they got legalized on the right and legalized on the left, they have people, especially in some of the college towns that are the uh, prevalence of marijuana possession up there is incredible, and it's overwhelming the ability of law enforcement in Idaho to deal with people from Washington or Montana or Oregon that are possessing it legally in their state and coming into ours.
There has been, and I think that you hinted at this a little earlier in the show, a more permissive attitude. It's a more libertarian attitude among our state legislators. Not all of them, but among some of them, and moving us maybe more and more in this direction. And it seems to be a growing movement. And I can think that somebody down the road is going to say, well, we'll just throw in the towel and join them. That is the pressure is going to be very great for that to happen.
Well, it already is among certain groups. I mean, in the Idaho legislature now, you have kind of two extreme groups that have united in the pro-drug, anti-law enforcement kind of mentality, and that's the people at the very far right, and the people at the very far left. The ACLU type people and the Freedom Foundation type people, and they advocate, laxer marijuana laws, which I'm sure will turn into laxer laws on drugs in general, more leniency in sentencing, fewer crimes being punishable by prison sentences, the drug forfeiture bill is advocated by people on those both extreme ends. It's and then there are the people in the middle who listen to confusing data from all sides and they just don't know what. And so it's become a very confusing thing.
We wanted to point out Grant Lobes is in studio with us until 10 o'clock this morning. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we only have about 50 seconds before the next break at 9:30. But if you feel you'd like to give us a call, feel free to call us at 208-736-0300 during the next half hour of the program. We've got a lot to talk about still yet. This is the holiday season, as they call it, and that means lots of people out there are going to probably be going through your system as well. It starts out with a little revelry, and then it ends up in a little bit of disappointment.
Sometimes, yeah.
We'll talk about that coming up because it's the Christmas party season and all. People have to obviously be aware that you could end up sitting in a courtroom somewhere if you do imbibe a little too much. We've got more on the way in just a few minutes. We're at 51. That should be roughly our high temperature for the day. And a quick note, we're looking at temperatures in the mid-60s tomorrow, perhaps as well on Thanksgiving Day. Joining us in the studio for another half hour, Grant Lobes. He's the Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney. Telephone number, if you'd like to reach the show as well, is area code 208-736-0300. Question came up for the prosecutor from me in the last segment of the program. I wanted to ask him about this as well, because we mentioned we have a couple of strains in the state legislature that are moving more toward a libertarian approach to crime. And just last week, we were joined on Wednesday morning on the show by Representative Raul Labrador, who's also running for governor. And he as well has been, I think, associated with this movement to some degree. And we were talking with him last week about civil asset forfeiture, which you've said there's already some restrictions in Idaho. This is not like Oklahoma or Arizona. But there had been a bill that was sent through the legislature, got through the legislature, vetoed by Governor Otter. And I think that Representative Labrador was strongly hinting that if I'm your governor by January of 2019, this law will be signed. And so he, as I understand it, has a very populist message with a lot of people in the state. On the other hand, from a law enforcement perspective, a lot of people aren't quite sure about him yet.
Yeah.
I didn't want to criticize the candidate per se.
Yeah, I
some
think
of the
that
issues.
I'll leave whether I'm quite sure about him alone for the moment and talk about the civil forfeiture issue, because either he fundamentally misunderstands Idaho law, which may be because he's been dealing with federal law, or he certainly misunderstands the law that was passed and which Governor Otter vetoed. First of all, I did listen to that part of the show, and I was very happy to hear the congressman say that he does not believe that law enforcement in Idaho has abused civil asset forfeiture. And that's an important thing for him to have said, and I support his saying that, and I welcome the admission, because many of the people in the legislature and many of the hearings in the legislature went off on all the abuses that there are in Idaho without proving any of them. And I would agree with Congressman Labrador that there are no, that I've been told about, there are no abuses of the current civil asset forfeiture law in the state of Idaho. Now, the problem with a lot of his comments are that he seems to equate civil asset forfeiture federally with that in Idaho. He seems to assume that if somebody in Ohio did something wrong, that it could happen here, because what's the difference? And the difference is Idaho has a completely different law. Mm-hmm. It's much more restrictive. It's much more, the law in Idaho is focused on making sure we don't take anything from anybody who doesn't deserve to have it taken. The most alarming thing that Representative Labrador said was that the law in Idaho allows the taking of property without due process. Nothing could be farther from the truth than that. Obviously, that would be unconstitutional, and the civil asset forfeiture in Idaho, as well as federally, has been upheld in all of the courts that you can name, all the way up to the Supreme Court. there is a massive amount of due process with regard to civil asset forfeiture. Police can't just take your stuff and that's the end of it. Officer Smith says it's his and now it's gone. The officer has to seize it along carefully prescribed guidelines. He has to hold it until there is a hearing in front of a judge where the judge listens to evidence from both sides and decides that under Idaho's law and under the Constitution and under the court cases that define Idaho's law, the asset has been seized appropriately because you're engaged in drug trafficking or drug selling or drug manufacturing, and this is part of either the assets or the proceeds or how you make your drugs or how you distribute your drugs or whatever. That's what's seized. So what was passed last session was not anything like what Congressman Labrador is advocating. It only said that instead of seizing your assets for every drug crime, we could no longer seize assets for mere possession. There had to be proof that the possession and the asset seized was linked to sale, manufacture, distribution, or moving the drugs through the state in some way. So that was the main change that was made. And then after that, a lot of things having to do with reporting, keeping stats on what was seized, what it was used for, things like that. Those were the main changes. There was no recognition in this statute that was passed by the legislature last year that Idaho is doing this without due process. That is just a figment. There's no truth to that at all. So he could sign that bill, and I'd say, well, it's not needed because there isn't any problem in Idaho, as he pointed out. And if he signs it, Idaho will still be one of the many states that uses drug asset forfeiture to try to stop major drug dealers.
We have more coming up with Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lobes from Twin Falls County. It's coming up on 9:40 and 48. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Got about 15 minutes left. Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lobes is joining us in studio on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley. Question or comment for the prosecutor, 208-736-0300. We were talking a couple of segments ago. You're seeing these spikes in activity, arrests and the like, and prosecutions, and obviously that relates to spikes in crime generally. We are now into that season. I had a friend, he was a sheriff many, many years ago, and he told me, he said, we do most of our DUI arrests on Thanksgiving weekend because he said the college students all come home and they go out and see their friends, have too much to drink. So he said, even though we do some Christmas Day and some Independence Day, he said the big spike that they would see in his particular county was Thanksgiving weekend. But we enter a period now where from now until January 2nd, where I'm sure that nationwide we see increases in this.
That's true. And I guess I hadn't thought of the arrival home of the college students as a factor, but yeah, the holiday season is taken as a whole the biggest DUI season that we have. There are individual holidays like 4th of July, St. Patrick's Day, where there's a big spike, and they may even have higher numbers than, say, Christmas or New Year's or Thanksgiving. But as a whole, from about now till the first week in January is a fairly high, average DUI time. And we've already had a lot in November already, so our baseline is pretty high. So when we add the increase from the holidays to the already high baseline, we're looking at some possibly dangerous roads out there.
We have a caller with us, and caller, you're up next. You're on the air at 9:45. Go ahead.
Hey, Bill, maybe Grant can address that question earlier about false accusations and slander and how he might be able to handle that and help somebody.
Oh, well, okay, sure. We were talking earlier in the program about what's the current, as I called it, the Salem witch hunt in an email to you earlier. You've got people who are falling left and right in media, entertainment, and government candidates. And some of this may obviously be legitimate complaints that a lot of people have. On the other hand, nobody in most of these cases is bringing forth much evidence. And so we've got trial by public opinion or media. And does it worry you as a prosecutor that we're into this sort of period?
Well, yeah, I think it worries me as a citizen, as a human, as a prosecutor, as a man. I think it worries me on a lot of fronts. Before I go into that, though, the standard, the standard comment needs to be made that to the extent that these things are true and that they are happening, especially the ones that are crimes, it's pretty alarming and extremely serious. I mean, there aren't any crimes that we take more seriously in my office than sexual offenses, especially those against children, and forcible sexual offenses against anyone. Um, and what we have now is, thanks to Harvey Weinstein, who is like patient A. I mean, he's like the person who brought the disease to the continent. What we have is an environment where there are accusations coming out pretty much every day against pretty much anybody you can think of. The higher profile the person, the more likely they're going to be accused of something. And they may be true, they may be not true, I don't know. But they're not going through any process. They're not going through any rigorous testing. They're not going through any police investigation, any nobody's checking to see if, well, if this happened on this such and such date, were you even there then? They have varying degrees of vagueness about details, and there really are two big differences. One is the type of accusation which is actually accusing somebody of a crime, and several of those, the Harvey Weinstein one, several of those could actually be rape crimes. Perhaps the Kevin Spacey one is an actual crime. And then some of those are well past the statute of limitations, so there's nothing anybody can do about it anyway except talk about it on Facebook. Some of them are being investigated, and as you've seen both on the East Coast and the West Coast, and even in Europe, some of Weinstein's cases are being investigated by actual authorities. The ones that are beyond the statute of limitations, there's no point in investigating. There's nothing anybody can do about it, in the legal system. And then there's the whole other type, which are, this happened and it was really gross. You shouldn't have done this. It was disgusting. I didn't want you to do this. I was pressured into doing that. I didn't want to do that. You were gross. You showed me stuff I didn't want to see, et cetera, et cetera. Many of those aren't crimes and wouldn't have been crimes at the time. They're just loutish behavior by crude people. And those fall generally into the general sexual harassment kind of things, some on the job, some not. And those are the ones that, seem to be getting prosecuted over Facebook. And then once it's on Facebook, then it goes to TV, and then TV reports what Facebook said, and Facebook reports back what TV said, and it just swirls all around. And, while some of these, depending upon your prejudice or your belief about the people being accused, some of them ring kind of true, and you think, oh, that guy did that. Well, then you stop to think, as a person in my position who is involved in requiring that proof be brought before you conclude somebody's guilty, you think, well, really, it seems like he might have done that, but what's the proof? What cross-examination has this victim been put through? And it's alarming to think that these accusations can be made and careers can be ruined, and broadcasters are taken off the air, and people are forced to retire, and advertisers drop people's programs, when there's really nothing more than a person saying, this happened to me 10 years ago. That being said, it is entirely possible that a lot more of this is going on than anybody thinks, and that a lot of these accusations are true, which is alarming for us, even if they can't be prosecuted, even if they fall short of prosecution, or if they're too old to prosecute. It's alarming to think that's happening everywhere.
We've got a caller with us, and we're at 9:50. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story with Grant Lopes. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to counter some of the information that the venerable prosecutors offered. I found information that the Colorado Department of Public Safety and the FBI claim that crime has actually gone down in states like Colorado and Washington. And the Colorado Department of Public Safety reported a 6% decrease in the violent crime rate from 2009 to 2014 in the years that weed was legalized, both in Washington and in Colorado. Also, the National Cancer Institute says it's impossible to overdose from cannabinoids because it affects the different centers in the brain. And I'd like to know what the prosecutor has to say about my numbers that are actually from the FBI. Thank you.
Well, I didn't bring my massive stack of Colorado data with me today because I didn't know we were going to discuss it in detail. Those numbers are either erroneous, distorted, old, or just made up. I don't have all of the information from Colorado, but the information that I have most recently seen is from much more recent than 2014. The initial information from these states shows almost no change because we haven't seen the impact of the change in the law hit. With regard to it's impossible to overdose on marijuana, that's flat out 100%
There was just a story last week
not
about
true.
a child who died.
Yes, I mean, especially children, but adults as well. And you see it, and there was a famous article written not too long ago, we've talked about it in the show before, by a nationally syndicated columnist who decided to go to Colorado and have some of the brownies just because, hey, it's
Maureen
legal.
Dowd,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Give it a try. She clearly overdosed on it and was fortunate to survive without any long-lasting effects. But we see an enormous number of children who overdose on it. For people to peddle the information that marijuana is okay for you, go ahead and try it, go ahead and use it, go ahead and have a brownie is just flat out dangerous and irresponsible. And the thing is that, a lot of people who have grown up thinking marijuana is no biggie. I used to smoke it in high school, or my buddy smoked it, or, there was a whole crowd of people that smoked out behind the shed and, after shop class, and it was no big deal. Don't be fooled into thinking that what's going on now is the same as that. The potency is dramatically higher. And in some of these things, like the edibles, the potency is off the scale. And that is extremely dangerous, especially because on the edible things, it's marketed like candy. It looks like candy. Some of it is almost close to copyright infringement, the labels and the similarity to actual candy and cookie brands. So if you would like, next time I will bring my massive stack, and I've gone through it in detail several other times when I knew we were going to talk about it. The numbers from Colorado are alarming. The governor in Colorado is alarmed by it and has actually told our governor, don't do this, Butch Otter. Do not let your state go down the same road we've gone down. So you can cherry pick numbers here and there, especially old numbers like from 2009. And you can say it's not as bad as we think, but it's bad and getting worse.
There was in fact, I may have sent you the link, a study last week, and it got picked up by a lot of papers in England, but not necessarily many here, that said young people, teenagers who smoke this, even if they do it lightly, they don't smoke a lot, can do so much brain damage now. It can create problems with schizophrenia later in life and reduce the amount of dopamine that your brain gets.
Right. And those connections are well known. And that study is only the most recent in a long string of studies showing the damage, sometimes permanent, that it can do to brains of younger users.
We've got about 2 minutes to go. We'll squeeze one last caller in. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Grant Lobes. Make it quick. Oh, well, I guess that was very quick. We just briefly mentioned, the fellow called about the fact that there's no due process in a lot of these accusations of past sexual misdeeds by certain people in public life. You worked on Capitol Hill. There was a comment made the other day. I was watching a TV show, and Ann Coulter was one of the guests, and she was asked about her experience when she was a staffer on Capitol Hill. And she said, I hate to tell you this, because she said, a lot of my regular readers aren't going to like it, but she said the nicest person to his staff during my time there was probably Ted Kennedy. Despite his reputation, he treated the staff very, very well. Just yesterday, there was a woman who serves in the House, DeGette is her name, from Colorado, who was on a program and said that a fellow Democrat that she had served with, who later ended up as mayor of San Diego and then ended up, his career fell apart because of this stuff. He pinned her in an elevator one day, and there seems to be no end to this, but a lot of people are miffed because it seems that the members of the House and Senate have inured themselves.
Yeah.
You can't get around the fact that even names.
I was watching a show the other night, and all of the things that you had to go through to make a complaint were up on the board, one after another. You have to wait 30 days. If you're molested by a member of Congress and you work there, you've got to wait 30 days before you make a complaint. Then you make a complaint. Then you have to go through mediation. Then you have to wait 30 days after the mediation to formalize your complaint. And then there was another 30-day thing in there. That's outrageous. But of course, none of that stops you from calling the police. I mean, that is an internal kind of thing, like it would be, in your company. I mean, your company may have policies on how you make a complaint for work-related purposes. But that doesn't mean you can't make a complaint to the police, no matter how ridiculous the congressional restrictions are. But yeah, as Congress often does, it makes different laws for itself than it does for everyone else. For instance, like on Obamacare, I mean, they made a totally different law for, health care for Congress and congressional employees than they did for everyone else. That's typical. But I would look to see them change that right quick. I would bet.
We will see you again third week of December, if not before. And for people who'd like to maybe, if they've got a question or comment at the office, what's the number?
736-4020.
Want to thank Grant Loebs, Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney, for dropping in today. Rush Limbaugh's program is next, following the news at 10 o'clock. Bill Colley saying, God willing, the creek don't rise. I'll be back here between 8 and 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.